Our men, his story. Our transformation, his glory. This is Disciple. Welcome to the Brotherhood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Disciple Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Dibler. At Disciple, we're equipping men of God to walk boldly in the light and truth of God's Word so that they can lead lives of ministry and mission and honor the call of the Great Commission. Welcome back to the Disciple Podcast, everyone. I have a phenomenal guest with me tonight. My brother that, actually grew up in the same neck of the woods that I ran around in rural Pennsylvania. Had no idea how God was going to make this connection many years later. But Chris Riedy, thank you for joining us, buddy. You want to say hello to everybody? Tell them a little bit about who you are.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Riedy. I'm a former certified athletic trainer and strength coach. That was my profession throughout my life. And, I grew up in the church and I was saved at a young age, but my life went through a lot of transitions. And because of that, later in my life, in my 50s, God gave me two hearts. A new heart physically, because I had ruined my heart through abuse of steroids and just a lifestyle that was not very healthy. And then he also gave me a new spiritual heart.
Wow.
And
this is going to be a good one, Chris. I'm like two hearts. How many people have that story? Very few.
Not too many. And God, basically at that point in my life, laid me in a hospital bed at the University of Pennsylvania. And I couldn't leave the bed because I had a device basically keeping my heart functioning, as well as about 10 IVs. And at that point, I couldn't go back to my old ways. And God said to me, you have a choice to make. And
wow. Well, let's pause right there. Because you don't give away the whole thing yet.
No, I won't. But yeah. But I was just going to share that the verse that it's become the verse that's come to be my verse through all this is Ezekiel 36:26, which, God says, I'll remove your heart of stone and give you a new heart. And that is what happened to me 100%.
Incredible. Yeah, I've been excited to get this podcast done because I know that piece of your story, and it's remarkable. I'm excited today to get the big picture story. Like, sure. You and I have known each other for about a year's time. What's wild is, Chris and I came into contact, through this beautiful platform on LinkedIn, which is where I meet a lot of the guys that I'm in community with at Discipled. But it's just so crazy because once we started talking and recognized that we had this very kind of local connection in this small town in Pennsylvania. I mean, Chris's mother lives in if my small town were to have suburbs, you would say she lives in a suburb of my small town, which is remarkable because it's a town of 1,000 people probably.
Most, probably.
And then I come to find out that, Chris is great friends with a guy that I went to high school with who was essentially my mentor when I was getting involved with football. He was the starting quarterback my freshman season who mentored me as I, kind of grew up in the game. And
it's awesome.
Here, close friends. It's amazing how God makes these connections. I just praise the Lord. The Holy Spirit is alive and active. And, I'm here in South Carolina. Chris is still up in Pennsylvania, and, no mileage can separate us,
And the weather's the same.
And the weather is the same. Yeah, we're recording this in mid-January, and it's 20-some degrees in the mornings here in Myrtle Beach right now, which is kind of crazy. So it's not
17 years. So
yeah, we're not far removed from that.
Yeah.
Nuts. So anyway, let's get the full picture of Chris's story today. Chris, why don't you walk us back to the beginning? Tell us a little bit about, young Chris and your involvement perhaps in your relationship with your faith at the early stages of your life, and then maybe how that continued to grow, or did you drift away? Like, I want to hear the full story from the beginning and how we get to that point where, you get the 2 new hearts,
Sure. Yeah.
I'd love to hear.
Well, my story begins, my mother and father, Howell Daniel Riedy, but he just went by Dan, and my mom, Linda. I was born in 1966. And when I was born, my mom and dad lived up in a borough called Emmaus, and we lived on South Mountain. And they thought it'd be a great location. We had a nice house up there. And then when the winter came one year, the snow actually was backed up to our front door. You could not get out our front door.
Oh, wow.
So my dad had no way to get off the mountain. So he went and bought a Jeep. And after that, we never had stuff like that again on the mountain.
Of course not.
But anyway, when I grew up there, it was just me and my mom and dad, and my grandma stayed with us for a little while. She was sick. So it was just that community of us. And I had some really good friends that I made, even at a young age. When I was like 3, I had what we could always joke around. It's a girlfriend at that time, who lived right across the street from me.
Yeah.
And, but her dad, they raised chickens. So every day he'd be out there and he would chop off some chicken heads to make, like, for dinner, I guess. My mom could not tolerate that. So she would put all the drapes down and close all the doors when that was going on. But we had a lot of, good kid adventures, and we were always outside playing and exploring, and we'd find, like, go in the woods, which was crazy when you think about it now, because we were like 3 or 4 years old, and we'd be going off on these adventures in the woods, and no one ever worried about coming back.
I grew up very much the same way. Kind of had the wood lot behind the house, and that was like our favorite thing to do, was to go out and explore and blaze trails and build forts.
Salamanders and snakes. And now I can't stand snakes, but it was just a great time. And so when I was like 5 years old, we moved down into what's called Salisbury Township. It's a very residential community, new house, and my mom and dad moved us there. And then by that point, my sister was born, and she's 4 years younger than me.
Okay.
So we lived there, and we were going to a Lutheran church then. And, we were there every Sunday night, or every Sunday for service. And then sometimes we'd go Sunday nights for a service. And then in the meantime, my dad's brother, who had become a Christian, started becoming involved in this church called Faith Evangelical Free Church, which was in Trexlertown, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yep.
So they really wanted us to start going there. And so my dad was an electrician for General Electric. And my dad was like, when it came to electricity kind of stuff, it was amazing. And he had served in the Army just after the Korean War. And he never saw active duty. But when he was in the Army, he was so intelligent that they had drafted him to go in the CIA. So he was starting to go through that training. And when he was in that, unfortunately, his dad suffered a major heart attack. And my dad had to go home, and he ended up getting honorably discharged, because at that point he became like a caregiver provider for his mother and his brothers, and his older sister by that point was out of the house and kind of doing her thing, but he was kind of the person that had to go back and pick up those pieces. Yeah. So my dad is kind of a background to him. He grew up in a kind of the south side of Allentown. It was right below what would later become Cumberland Gardens, which was like a housing project they put together. And so it was a tough neck of the woods. Yeah. And my dad would tell me stories. So my uncles, every day he had to take his wagon, walk down, get a huge block of ice to bring back, because that's how they refrigerated their food. And my dad was one of those kind of guys that just he would never back down. Like when they would kill the carrier, he'd be the guy on the bottom, and he would never say uncle. They could pile 15 kids in a neighborhood on top of him, and he never quit. Yeah. So he kind of instilled that in me, like, you don't quit, you never give up. If you commit to something, you see it through.
Yep.
And that just kind of became my ethic. I would never quit. And so anyway, moving back to when we were kids, we went to Lutheran church, and then my uncle started talking to us about going Faith Evangelical Free Church. So we actually started going there, and my mom and dad both became saved. And my mom, who was a graduate of Kutztown College, and also,
wow. That's such familiar territory.
Crazy?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
She went back and got her master's in special education.
Okay.
Her undergrad was in art education, but then she went back and got her master's in special education. So she started working for the Allentown School District as a special education teacher.
Yeah.
And my dad also became involved in the church because of his electrical background. What had happened is the church had grown so much that they outgrew their old sanctuary and had built a new sanctuary, and they were making this new improved sanctuary. So he got involved in a lot of the electrical part of that. And I can remember being there as a kid, and they were doing all this work and meeting all these people. But Faith Church became a staple in our family. My uncle was going there, and his wife, and they had 3 boys, and they were all involved in the church. And the youngest of them, Stephen, and I became really close friends, and we did a lot of things together. So at Faith, I started going to vacation Bible school when I was there.
Yeah.
And when I was about 11 years old, one time at VPS, I'll never forget her name. My instructor was a lady named Debbie Ritchie. And she just really impacted my life.
Sure.
And she led me to become saved. And being saved at 11 it's hard because you do it, but you're 11 years old, you know, and it's kind of like, well, what does this mean for me? You know? And early on, I struggled with, am I really saved? Yeah. And I'll never forget, she taught me this thing with my hand. To just remember, Jesus will never leave me. And she goes, whenever you're doubting, just look at your hand and say that to yourself. And that became just a huge thing to me. And I
just out of curiosity, what caused you to question?
Well, because I was 11 years old.
Yeah.
And,
what does it really mean, right? Like how?
Right. And plus, you read about some of these people that get saved and they have these life-altering transformations.
Right.
Kid, you know, so I was like, I'm still a kid. Like, I still like to do kid things. I'm not ready to go out to Africa and be a minister and go and be a mission yet. Yep. But I was really intrigued by the ministry, like the mission outreach part of it, even at that age.
Sure.
So what happened is I started becoming like my neighborhood evangel for Christ with all my friends.
Is that right? Nice.
I would give them like those tracts. I don't know if you remember them. They were just color pages.
Oh, yeah.
And one was like black for your sin. And then one was like the blood was red for the blood of Christ. And then one was white for being washed like snow.
Right. Yep.
And one was like green for your new life. And I would tell my friends about this, and I'm like, you got to come to church. And some of my friends came. Other of my friends were like, that Chris Riedy is crazy now. And
I get some of that response, today. So
people still think I'm crazy. But anyway, so I started getting a lot, and even some close friends of mine actually came to youth group, and actually some of them became saved. So
praise the Lord.
It wasn't necessarily for me sitting down and praying with them to be saved. It was through like the youth pastor or another leader witnessing to them and leading them to Christ. So as I progressed on, when I got into high school at youth group, kind of middle school till junior high till like 9th grade and then on, one thing in my church that was different than the church I work at now is at youth, like a lot of people started dating and getting involved. And there were couples that that started dating like when I was in 10th grade that they dated till like we were seniors. And, they were very involved. And we all knew that they were engaging in premarital relations.
Yeah, right.
And so that was confusing to me because I'm like, well, the Bible's saying, and my dad's saying, you don't do that. But all these people in the church that were like, even pastors' daughters were actively involved in relationships. And I was like, and I remember two of my good friends, Mark and Keith, we were best friends all through like 8th through college. And we kind of struggled with this. We're like, is there something wrong with us that we think you shouldn't be doing this stuff? And eventually, unfortunately, we kind of gave into it. And probably I can be honest and say that in 9th grade is when my sexual activity started. And it was confusing, but I'm like, well, everybody else in church is doing it, so
must be okay, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so probably one of my most intense sexual relations was with one of our pastor's daughters. And it was a little crazy. Yeah. So, sometimes parked out front of her house in our car when I bring her home at night. I'm like, are you serious? We're right in front of your house, Wow. But anyway, so that was kind of confusing. But at the same time, I developed a lot of really close friends. I became active in our youth choir. And obviously I was the bass. And we went on to like a national competition. We competed out at Syracuse College. We were there for a week. And it was a week of like different ministry events and different lectures. But then we would do competitions in singing. And we won. And we went on to a national competition that was down in Virginia. And we competed there, but there was a lot of amazing choir groups there. Yeah. And we didn't win. We placed, but not enough to qualify to advance on. Right. Which is funny because later on in my story, when I was in college, I don't know if you remember, Matt, the Putting on the Lips. I mean, it was a lip sync show. Well,
goodness, no. I bet.
In Messiah, they had a competition and we entered it. And we did the song from Jay Giles' band, Love Stinks. And I was the drummer. And I had gone through some bad relationships at Messiah. And so every time it came to Love Stinks, I would do Love Stinks. And we actually won the competition.
Is that right?
And then there was a local mall that had a lip sync competition that if you won, you would advance and could eventually be on this TV show called Putting on the Lips. It was all lip sync bands. Nice. Well, we won, and we actually went on this show. So one of my best friends in college, he had the video of it, because it was all videotape back then. There were no discs or anything. Right. And I'm like, his name is Brian, and we connected later on here, and I'm like, you got to send me that video, and he still hasn't to this day. But
I would love to see that.
Yeah, you probably would. Yeah.
It'd be great. Oh man,
you probably like to see a lot of my videos of me singing. But anyway,
absolutely. I'm trying to picture it now, and I'm trying to picture you in college with probably a full head of hair and everything.
Well, actually, it's a funny story. I did have a full head of hair, but that's kind of my story. Is I also became kind of addicted with powerlifting. The first competition, I had a mohawk, because I was getting ready for teenage state.
Yeah.
So I had shaved into a mohawk. So you got to imagine, here I am walking on this Christian liberal arts campus with a mohawk. And because of all the heavy squats and deadlifts, I had blown out the blood vessels in my eyes. So my eyes were blood red, mohawk, and I would walk down the sidewalk and people would just part like the Red Sea in front of me.
Man. So when did the interest in powerlifting begin? Because now we're kind of like
when I was in high school.
High school? Okay.
Because when I was in high school, I wrestled and played football. Yeah. And me and my buddies from both, we became members at the Allentown YMCA. Yeah. So every day after school, we would walk to the YMCA. And we would work out together. And then next to the weight room was a wrestling room. So we'd go in there after we worked out and like wrestle each other. And then we had to get home. So we had to walk up this giant hill to get back home. and I would walk back to my dad's house on 11th Street, and the Y was on 17th Street. So city blocks are big if you know, if you've ever been in the city. So it was quite a walk, but we didn't care. We just had a great time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I got into high school, I was very active in the church. And then I was also had this group of friends that weren't in the church, but that were more like my secular friends, but they were all with like sports.
I was going to say, are they the sports friends, the powerlifting guys?
Yeah, they were the guys that I played football with, that I wrestled with.
Yeah.
And so
you're kind of managing almost like two identities at that
I was,
point, right?
I was living this
like,
church identity, and then I was living this sports identity, you know, but I seem to be able to manage it okay. But I will say that that at that point, you know, like my sexual desires were crazy. And also like I got into like drinking. I never got into drugs like pot or cocaine or any of those kind of things. I knew a lot of people in my life who did, but I just didn't like that. I didn't want to get into that realm.
Right.
And I felt bad enough that I was drinking so much. And eventually I'd gone into using, you know, anabolic steroids and stuff for my powerlifting. I'm like, that's enough. I'm never going to get into like the cocaine or that kind of stuff.
So tell me, like, because you mentioned steroids a couple times. So how did that get introduced to your life? Because you seem to have a pretty clean network for the most part.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually, when I was a freshman in college, I would go home starting my like second semester, my freshman year. I would go home on the weekends to lift at my gym. It was called Fred's Gym, and it was in Allentown. It was at that point the only powerlifting bodybuilding gym in the area.
I want to say that I've seen Fred's Gym T-shirts.
Yeah, I don't have any left, but I used to have tons.
Yeah, that's like a thing. Like that was kind of a.
It was in Allentown, right off of I can't think of the name now, but it was an old factory in Allentown. Fred had converted into this gym, and everybody went there. Everybody,
if you were a power lifter, that's where you wanted to.
That's where you went. Yeah. And I met a lot of guys, and actually one of the guys I met there, his name was Scott. He was like my mentor. I wanted to be Scott. And so we worked out together, and I just couldn't keep up. And I started talking to him. I'm like, well, what do I have to do? And that's when I learned about anabolic steroids.
So he introduced the guy that was essentially your mentor. Was the guy that
well, he was like, if you want to be at the national level, like
here's what you're gonna have to do. He didn't
do it, and I was a pretty good. Like I had competed in competitions before that, and I was a decent like drug-free lifter. You know, I was benching already like around 400, squatting around 6, and deadlifting around 6. And
that's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that's a lot of weight.
It wasn't what I wanted. Like these guys were that was like 800, squatting 800. I'm like, well, I want to do that, you know? Wow. And so unfortunately that phase of my life really threw me away from God. You know, I stopped going to church because Sundays were our squat days. So we would travel to sometimes gyms in New York and stuff to lift, like on Long Island and stuff. And, you know, that was on a Sunday. We'd leave at like 6 a.m. and drive up there, work out.
So what was the idea behind that? Just to get around other guys?
Other people that could watch what you were doing, you know, I met a great guy up there that owned a gym in Long Island. It was called Iron Island, and his name was Dr. Ken Leisner. And he was a chiropractor, but he had been in the strength game for a while, and he knew all these people. And he had like this amazing gym. The front part of it was his chiropractic office. He would see patients there, and then he would transition them into working out. So they weren't power lifters, but they were just like everyday people, but they would work out, and the front part of the gym was more like machines and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then in the back was just this amazing gym. Like he had dumbbells that went to like 200 pounds. He had just like in powerlifting, it's called the monolift. And what it is it's a thing that when you get into it to squat, you don't have to walk out anymore. You just stand up.
Right.
gets away because walking out is the hardest part. The hardest part of a heavy lift because you got to step out, you stand up, and then you got to take 2 steps back at least to clear the rack and do the lift. So when you have like 700, 800 pounds on your back and walking out with it, that was what caused a lot of injury. I saw a lot of guys like blow out their knees or whatever on that step out, because you got to think about it. You're putting all that weight on one leg and then bringing the other leg back. But I had grown up in that traditional walking out for so long that I had a hard time with the monolift. I just wanted to walk it out, and they're like, you got to learn how to do this. It makes it. So it did work. I mean, eventually I went from like a 650 squat to 850 in like a matter of no time, just because you're not, expending all the energy to walk out.
Yeah. That's crazy weight though. Oh my gosh.
Is, but, the thing about it kind of goes back to my dad and that never quit attitude. In that you can't be afraid of the weight. If you're afraid of the weight, you'll never do it. If you're not afraid of it, you don't care. You're like, I want more,
Yeah.
And the thing with it too is like, I would just be like my friend Scott, when he would psych up, he would go in the back room of the gym and he'd be back there and you could hear him like growling and getting ready to lift. And he would come out and he would look like, it was like Jekyll and Hyde, because Scott was a really nice guy. And we went to he came to my family picnics and everybody like, who is this freak? Because he was just a big muscular guy, strong guy. He was like a pussycat when he wasn't lifting.
Yeah, and that's like this alter ego that comes out.
Right. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
And I just tuned right into that. And that's how I started doing it. I would get myself so worked up. I'd be like dry heaving and stuff because I was so
much adrenaline. Yeah.
And I took it one step further. I started banging my forehead on the bar. And what happened is over time, I used to have this welt in the center of my forehead and it would just bleed like crazy. And like, I can remember competitions where I'd be going down with the weight and coming back up, it would like bleed into my mouth and I would go, and it would just spray the head judge, who was usually like in a white polo shirt with blood. But they do me and they just laugh about it.
What role are the steroids playing in all of this? Are they just like
makes you see what it does is people don't understand steroids is that if everybody could just take steroids and all of a sudden squat 800 pounds, well, then you'd see a million 800-pound squatters. Right. Steroids are more the recovery because it allows you to recover faster, so you keep progressing and getting stronger. But it also makes you, your testosterone level.
That's what I was going to say. Does it make you like more psychologically or emotionally
One time I got my
volatile?
testosterone level checked and my doctor was like, what are you doing? Because like my testosterone level was like 3 times the amount it should be for a man my age, like in their 20s and 30s. And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, oh, I know. And, and there was doctors in the Allentown area that you could go to. And if you gave them it was only like $20, they would write you prescriptions. And then I had a prescription card through my mom. So like I could go to the pharmacy and get these drugs through the prescription plan for like $10, versus like on the black market, they were 3 times that cost. Plus you didn't know if they were real. So that was one of the benefits of that because you were getting real stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem with it is as you get the gains, you're kind of like, well, I need stronger stuff.
More and more and more. Like it's never enough.
So much. And then the other problem is when you came off, you would lose all that.
Yeah.
And people were like, are you still working out? And to me, that was just like the ultimate slam. Of course I am. Can't you tell? They're like, not really. And I'm like, I'm never going off. And so
here's one more question as it relates to the steroids, because, you were mentioning that, you were kind of vulnerable from like the sexual activity perspective and at the tail end of high school. And this testosterone is obviously pumping at high levels now. So is this like leading you deeper into the captivity of that sin in this season?
100%. Yeah. Like I was just, sometimes when my wife and I talk about the past, she's like, I can't believe you don't have kids like all over the country. And I'm like, well, luckily I never wanted that to happen. So I was always took those precautions, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Or the person I was with would be like on, some kind of birth control or whatever.
Right.
So I don't have kids all over the country, so to speak. But thank the Lord. But you got to realize too, through all this, I had multiple serious relationships. Like when I left college, I met a girl in college who had always kind of liked me, but I just didn't really pay her much attention because I thought she was too like straight-laced for my type of girl. Like, you have to understand, like, I've always been attracted to brunettes with long hair. Yeah. I love the eyeshadow, and that was my thing. And she had the dark hair, but she was raised by a good family, but we connected my junior year, and but she was also very promiscuous as well. So it didn't change my ways. And we would get, we'd get hotel rooms off campus for the night and stuff. And, it just was just fueling that lifestyle, you know? And that was probably one of my biggest problems all through my adult years, is that I would meet women that were like right along in that same way of living. Exactly. Yeah. And so we got married, but it was a short marriage. We both started working for the same school district. At that point, I was the head athletic trainer. She worked with kids who were like in learning support kind of things. Yeah. And unfortunately, what happened is she had a lot of problems from her childhood. Yeah. And she ended up getting involved with a student at the school.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So what happened?
This is while in your marriage. This
we were married. Yeah. And what happened is, I knew this was going on. It was so hard for me because I had to be so careful. Because believe it or not, in all of this madness, I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to lose my career. Yeah. So I couldn't go after this kid because he was a high school kid. Yeah. And what ended up happening is we got called in to the administration, and they said, listen, we're not going to do anything to Chris because you do a great job here. Parents love you. The kids love you. But they said to my wife at the time, you're going to have to just quietly leave the school district. And so that's what happened. And then we got divorced because I was like, well, I can't, you're not loyal to me. I'm a big loyalty guy, Matt. And you may have noticed that about me. If I believe in you, I would die for you until you give me a reason to feel that you're not loyal, Yeah. So what happened is we got divorced, and that was kind of like a bad thing, because it was just fuel for me to just my addictions with steroids and lifting and with alcohol and sex just skyrocketed. Yeah. And actually at that time we had moved to the Harrisburg area, because I was working at a high school in not in Harrisburg, but one in kind of near Gettysburg.
I know where you mean.
Northern New York County School District. So, but I never wanted to live where I worked, because I had found out when you're a trainer, then you get calls from parents. Hey, I was gardening and I sprained my ankle.
Right.
Look at it. And I'm like,
sure, I'll be right over.
Right. Yeah. So I live more towards Harrisburg. I live in a town called Wormleysburg, and I had an apartment that was right across the street from the Susquehanna River, and City Island was right across from me.
Oh yeah.
So the fireworks at City Island were like the big event. So I'd have friends from school, coaches, and even though my athletic director were like, can I come to your house and watch the fireworks? I'm like, sure, come on over. And I lived next to a gas station, it wasn't a gas station anymore. It was like a guy that did repairs and stuff. And I got to be good friends with him. And he's like, if you have friends, they can park right here. And they would come. But the only problem is this road during the fireworks would just be packed with cars. And they would stop there then to watch the fireworks. So even after it was over, was like an hour wait. So we'd end up hanging out and entertaining and that kind of stuff. And it was good times. And then what ended up happening is one of the guys that was a coach at Northern, he was the freshman football coach. His name was Mark. We became really good friends, and he moved into, because it was a 2-bedroom apartment I lived in.
Yeah.
And
came to share the rent with you. And,
so
yeah.
he came in there, and like, we just had a great time. And like, my lifting life and my friendship with him and our friends that were other coaches and stuff was a separate world from that. And he knew what I was doing and stuff, and he never got involved in that, but we would spend a lot of times out together, him and I, and with other friends, and that just fueled that alcohol thing.
Yeah.
Like, we would go, like, there was a bar in town there that Thursday nights were like $1 Coors nights, and then Friday nights were $1, I forget what they were, Yinglings or something. And then, so we would be there Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights after football games. We would go there, and just a lot of crazy things.
So would you say that you were like in addiction with alcohol, or was it more of just kind of like an escape?
It was something I just did when I was out, but because of my all or none mentality. Like if someone said
go
to
hard
me,
or go home. Yeah.
Right. Like if someone said to me, I bet you can't drink.
Oh yeah.
10 shots.
You were going to prove them wrong.
Bring them on, you know? And then, but the problem is I would get crazy. And I can remember like whipping empty shot glasses across the dance floor at this place. And it was just not a good thing.
Right.
And I also had become associated with 2 brothers. The one owned the gym that I trained at. It was called Grimwood's Power Plant. And they became like my real brothers. Like we spent a lot of time together. And my friend Terry that owned the gym, and his wife Tamara would become the first woman in the country to bench 400 pounds at a body weight of 185 in competition. And unfortunately, Terry, he had addictions with cocaine, but he was also a huge steroid dealer. So he was my source.
Yeah.
And because of that, he would like let me get things on credit that I could pay back later. But sometimes I would do things for him. Like if somebody owed him money, I would go to the clubs they went to and find them, and then kind of
shake them down.
To come pay Terry. And so I was really in a bad, like, God at that point was, here's the thing. I always knew that what I was doing was wrong.
Right.
And I always felt this conviction in my heart about it. But Satan just said, oh, don't worry about that right now. You know,
you clean that up later.
Time, and you're having a great time right now.
Yeah.
So in that time, through Terry, there was a girl who lived downstairs from him named Michelle that I started seeing. And we lived together in her apartment, and I still had my apartment. And then eventually she moved into my apartment with me. And by that point, my friend Mark had moved out because he was going back to school to become a guidance counselor. And he got left coaching and all that kind of stuff. So she moved in, and we lived there. We met in like 1995, and then we got married in 1997 because she was pregnant with my first son, Tyler.
Oh, wow.
So we lived there, and he was born, and then we bought a house in Mechanicsburg, and it was a nice, like, Cape Cod, had a finished basement, and I put a lot of time into that place, but I was still, you know, very much lifting, and she knew all my lifting friends. She would come with me to competitions. She knew what I was doing, but like, she didn't really care, because at the same time, the physical relationship was pretty crazy between her and I. And so we ended up buying this house. We lived there together, married. And then then in 1999, I had my daughter, Marissa, was born. So my son, Tyler, was the oldest. Marissa was 2 years younger than Tyler. And
I want to ask you that too. So when you had your son and your daughter, did that change anything for you as it
Well, it
relates
changed
to
me
like?
as far as my son. When my son was born, my love for him was just like I've never felt for anything before in my life.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, I saw him being born. He was my wife Michelle. She was having problems. She called me. I was actually at the gym, and she said my water broke. So I flew out of there, got home, took her to the hospital, and they tried to induce her. She was 24 hours. They had put an epidural in her, but she wasn't dilating much more.
Mm-hmm.
And by that point, it's called meconium in the fluid, which means my son had gone to the bathroom in the amniotic sac, and they're like, if he breathes that, it could be fatal. You get infections in his lungs. So she had an emergency C-section, and I'll never forget when he came out, because my mom had come up and my stepfather, and we were talking, because I had dark hair. You can't tell now, but you can tell from my beard. And my wife had blonde hair. So my mom, we're like, it's probably going to have dark hair because that's a dominant gene. And my mom's like, what if it had red hair? And I'm like, oh, that's never going to happen. Well, when my son Tyler was born, he came out, and I'm like, you can hear it on the video. I'm like, does he have red hair? And they're like, yeah, he's a redhead. And so I'm like, can you believe it?
That's wild.
But it turns out my great grandfather was a redhead, and my wife's grandfather was also a redhead. So it was genetic.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, we had Tyler, and I took a little time off from work when he was born. And I was the first one to change his diapers, because she had a C-section. And back then you stayed in the hospital.
Yeah, you had to recover. Yeah.
Come home and they let you recover. So I would come there every day, and I would change his diapers. I would feed him. I gave him his first bath. He was just so important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at that time that I was still lifting and stuff, but it also at that time, I was starting to have some health issues.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was diabetic, and it wasn't that had caused the diabetes. My mom and dad were both diabetic. My grandparents were my grandmother and grandfathers were all diabetic. Both my grandfathers had passed away from heart problems related to uncontrolled diabetes.
Oh, wow.
So my genetic pool was just not good. And the steroids, the alcohol, the eating, I would eat. I competed in the 308 pound class, and I was never a full 308 pounds. I was usually right around like 297, 300. So I would eat I can't even tell you how much food I would consume to try to get to that size.
Yeah.
And all that, I was starting to have some health problems. So right after he was born, I had to go in the hospital, and they discovered that I had some blockages.
Mm.
And so he was, I think, a year old at that point, and Tyler, and I had to go, and I had to have my first bypass surgery.
Oh, wow.
So it was really scary, really emotional. And I went through the surgery. I got home, and, my parents came up because my wife had to go back to work, and they took care of me. And actually, my dad and I had really, because I was not living the life that he wanted me to live, and part of it goes back to when I was back at Faith Church when I was a kid, because as I mentioned, I was really into possibly becoming a missionary. And one night at church, they had this service where they had a fire, and you could pick up a piece of wood and write on it what you wanted to commit to God. And I had said, I commit my life to missions, and I threw it in the fire as a commitment. And obviously I wasn't living that life. And my dad would always say to me, don't you remember that night? And look at what you're doing. And I was just like, I know, Dad, but it's not my calling, I don't think. And I should also say, when I went to Messiah College, my youth pastor had helped me get set up there, and he went up there with me, and I went to school to become a youth minister.
Wow.
Well, when I was there, I was also wrestling, and I got injured, and I had to go into the training room, and I'm like, what is this? I'd never, like in my high school, the training room was just this little closet,
Yeah.
locker room. That
wasn't much different for me. I remember.
Yeah. And you go into the guy that was quote unquote our athletic trainer. He was our strength coach, and he was not right mentally. So I remember I first hurt my knee my junior year in high school. I was running sprints and I went to step and my knee buckled and I could barely walk. And so I had to go up there, and he's like, "Oh, you're all right, Reedy. You just suck it up and you'll be fine." So I went back out. He told the coaches that, and I had to finish, running and you had to finish. Like, I was a lineman. If you didn't finish in a certain amount of time, everybody had to run extra. So
right.
I didn't want to do that. So I'm like screaming in pain, finishing. And then I had to ride my bike home from there to get home. So like I get home, my dad's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. My knee's messed up. I saw the trainer and he said there's nothing wrong." And by the next morning that was a Friday. Saturday was killing me. I didn't go to practice. And then Sunday after church, I said, I could barely walk out of church. And my dad said, "We're going to Monday to see the doctor." And here I had torn my meniscus and I tore my medial collateral ligament. So I was out for a little while, and I just told the coaches I'm not coming back to football. Yeah. But I still wrestled in the wrestling season and stuff. And so actually what happened is when Messiah College, when I enrolled there, they found out I was a wrestler, and they were like, "We would like you to be our heavyweight wrestler." And I wasn't a full heavyweight. I was only like 175 pounds.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, maybe you can gain weight or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, I could probably do that easily." And so I went to Messiah and I wrestled 1 year as a heavyweight wrestler. But then what happened is, when I got injured and I went into the training room at Messiah, it was just like this giant room with like whirlpools and ultrasound machines and treatment. And they're like, "Yeah, this is a major here." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You can get a job as an athletic trainer, get paid to watch sports and do all this cool stuff?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "I'm changing my major." So I did. I changed it to athletic training. And I'm not saying that was a mistake as far as where it led me, because when I was an athletic trainer, I loved my job. And when I first started athletic training, I wasn't married yet to Michelle, and I just put my heart into it. I was there 7 days a week, taking care of kids on Sundays that got hurt on Saturday football games or wrestling matches. It was my life. And I made a lot of good connections there as far as coaches and parents. Like one of the first years I was there, I couldn't go home for Christmas because the day that it fell on, I had commitments at school for like tournaments and stuff. So this family said, "Come to our house for Christmas." And it was just awesome. I spent Christmas with them, and they kind of adopted me as like their oldest son. And their son was actually a member of the football team, and his name was Chad. And he had some serious shoulder injuries, and I rehabbed him. One thing was, rehab was my thing. And a lot of kids, I spent just hours helping them to get better. And people really appreciated that, Yeah. And also I was also in charge of the weight room, and just my work ethic, and I would push these kids, and they would write me letters when they got to college to play. They were playing like Division I basketball and stuff. And they'd be like, "Mr. Riedy, when you were my coach, I hated you, but your ethic and determination, and you could demonstrate anything you wanted us to do, you would do yourself." They're like, "I've never had another coach like that." And they're like, "You made me a better person in college because I realized you have to work hard." Yeah. And I still have those letters. It meant a lot to me. It was during that time that Michelle and I had married, and then I had my son Tyler, and I started to struggle with the whole athletic training thing because as Tyler started to get older and he started playing t-ball. I'm like, I don't want to be not able to see him play sports because I'm watching somebody else's child play sports.
Yeah.
And so
you've recovered now at this point, like physically from what you went through?
I was doing okay, but I went back on steroids. I was still competing. I started to feel myself like some changes. And so what ended up happening is I left Northern and I moved back down to Allentown because my dad was, as I mentioned to you when we were talking earlier, he was starting to have some health problems, and he just didn't seem right to me. Like I said, my dad was a really smart guy. When he was in the Army, they drafted him to becoming going to the CIA. Mm-hmm. He was just a brilliant guy, and he could figure things out. I remember when I was a kid and I'd struggle with algebra, he'd be like, Chris, it's so easy. And I'd be like, Dad, it's not so easy. I just wasn't a math guy. And I was worried about him. And so I wasn't, by that point, Michelle and I had separated, and we just having a lot of other issues in our lives. And I didn't want to fight all the time in front of the kids. Yeah. And I just thought it was better for me to leave. And I would have the kids every weekend. And
how old were the kids when you separated? How old were they?
Well, let's see. Tyler would have been, he would have been like maybe 10. Mm-hmm. And so Marissa was maybe like 6. Yeah. And what ended up happening is I came back here and I would have them, then they would come back then to see me on the weekends. I had an apartment, and what ended up happening is when I came back downtown, I worked for a company called Peak Strength and Conditioning, because I was kind of tired of the whole athletic training world, of just constantly being like on a field and just, you know what it is about it? It's kind of like you're just around people that are constantly, they're always hurt, or they're always complaining, or they're always, like this and that. And I just got tired of it. You know, I'm like, can't you ever think of the positive things? You can still walk. You're still alive. You're 17 years old, you know, like, and I just needed a break. So I started working for this company, Peak Strength and Conditioning, and I kind of got more into the realm of sports training. And I always kind of loved that part of it. But the only problem with that job is it was a commission job. So, and unfortunately for me, I was much better at making relationships with people. And then I ended up, like, after they would do the program for a couple months, I'd be like, you don't have to pay anymore. I'll just keep helping you out when you're in the gym or whatever. And so it wasn't really lucrative for me. Yeah. And then what happened is I got a call from a guy, and he said to me, there's a doctor up in Bethlehem who is looking for somebody to be what was called a physician extender. So it's kind of like a physician assistant, but you're an athletic trainer. Right. So you have to work under the doctor's orders, but you can do rehab, you can evaluate patients, all those kind of things. So I started working for him. The guy was kind of a jerk. He was one of those kind of guys that in high school, he was a nerd kind of guy. And he actually went to the high school my wife went to, and her brother knew him. And he was an athletic trainer in high school. And so he became a doctor. And I think when he became a doctor, he thought that was kind of his look at me compared to all those people in high school that bullied him. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, but it was there that I met my wife, Jen. And Jen had a son named Jonathan. And I met Jonathan when he was like 5. And the first time I went to see him, Jen invited me for dinner, and I went to see him, and him and I played out back for an hour. Wow, and awesome. She was married though, and her husband came home, and all her son could tell him about that was about me, that I was the greatest guy he ever met in his life. And I'm like, oh no. Oh
wow.
Not a good thing. So what ended up happening is her husband and her had some psychological battles they fought. Yeah. And she had been hospitalized for it. So she just decided it was time to get out of that toxic relationship. And her and I, our relationship continued. We started dating, and we moved in together, and we had a great time. We were very committed. And the thing about Jen and I is she shares that same loyalty thing that I have. Yeah. And when we met, we said, listen, I don't care if you're right or wrong. I will always defend you. I'll never turn my back on you. But when it's over, I'm going to say to you, part of my language, what the hell are you thinking? You know, because you're so wrong. Right. And I just love that about her, that loyalty, because I never could find that in anybody else. Right. And, you know, I was still living my lifestyle. I was still competing, and she would never come see me compete, but she knew what I was doing. But my health was getting worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And I'll lead this to the end if you want, Matt, and then we can.
Yeah, we may have to do a part 2, buddy, because we got a lot more left, and there's a lot more meat on the bone here, and it's about to get good. So yeah, let's.
I met, and I was still living that lifestyle, and there's some funny stories about when our life early on. It was from there that really my life turned a corner as far as my health. And I can tell you honestly, if it wouldn't have been for Jen in my life, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I would have died. Yeah. I firmly in my mind knew that by the time I doubted I would live to 40 years old, just the way my lifestyle was going. Yeah. And meeting her, and I didn't know it at the time because, she wasn't saved either. What it would do in my life as far as bringing me back to God is just amazing. Yeah. And the second part of my story is really where the new heart testimony really takes place. Yeah. And that part is probably the part of my testimony that's I feel is the most amazing. You know? Yeah. Just shows God at work.
So you're at this point now where physically your body is like starting to shut down.
Yeah, it was getting bad. I had to have a second bypass surgery just before Jen and I got involved, because my first bypass, because of what I was doing, most of those bypasses had already become blocked. Wow. And so I had to have a second bypass, and they actually used what's called the median artery. I think that's what it's called. And they took that and it's in your chest, and they put it into my heart so it would be a direct blood supply that wouldn't get clogged up. And they did a couple other bypasses, but basically at that point, the doctor said to me, if you don't change your life, you're not going to live, And when Jen heard that, she was like, that's it. You got to start making some changes. And from there, it leads just to an amazing story of God giving me two hearts and also turning my wife's heart to him and her becoming saved.
Wow. Well, brother, we will pick back up with a part 2 here because this is going to be the good stuff, and I can't wait to get into it, man. It's been a fun ride unpacking kind of the front end of your story, because there was so much that I didn't know about you, and it's wild to hear you share all of these, different elements of your background that really tie to a lot of the things that I knew growing up too. So love it, man. We'll be back with Chris Riedy here shortly, folks. Get ready for part 2. It's going to be a great story. New heart, two new hearts. So.
New heart.
Talk to you all soon. God bless.